Alrighty, we're starting. All right, good morning, everybody. This is Coffee and Politics on this cold December morning. So we are here today. We're going to keep going with the conversation with children and issues that can come into the household that can definitely challenge those situations, especially looking at the impact on children. So we have Judge Roberto Canas here, and we have Judge Magnis here to discuss both of their courts, the kind of cases that they've seen, and just kind of how those cases can play out with families and lead to different outcomes in the family court system. So, Judge Canas, could you introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. Well, I'm Judge Rob Canas, and I have been the judge of County Criminal Court number 10 for 10 full years now. I was elected back in 2006. We were part of the wave of 2006 together, Rick and I. And my court is a domestic violence court. That's all I handle, are misdemeanor domestic violence cases. Misdemeanors meaning that the maximum punishment can be up to a year in jail or probation, which is usually what happens.
Okay.
And my court was named a domestic violence mentor court.
Okay.
One of only 6 in the whole country.
And what does that mentorship mean?
It means that other communities that want to start a court like mine, a domestic violence court, can come to Dallas and
receive training?
Well, receive training, and then, you know, as they proceed through the process of creating a court in their jurisdiction, we would be able and to help them through that process. Okay. So it's not just a come to Dallas one time for a training. You know, we'll help you walk through those steps.
Okay, that's great. That's great. And you are also faculty with the National Judicial Institute?
Yes, the National Judicial Institute on Domestic Violence, which is a partnership of 3 national nonprofits where the goal is to educate judges on domestic violence. Okay, that is wonderful.
That is great. And Judge Magnis.
I'm judge of the 283rd Judicial District Court. That's a criminal district court.
And that's a felony court,
It's a felony court. I just hear felony cases. I hear all felony cases. However, in addition to that, I've established Texas's first supervision program for high-risk domestic violence offenders that are placed on probation pursuant to a plea bargain.
Okay.
I supervise them through a very rigorous, it's about a year program followed by about a year of aftercare, and it's a good program that we've started, and we've been doing it for several years, and actually Judge Brandon Birmingham will be taking over at the end of the year for me.
Okay, that is awesome.
I've been a judge for 10 years as well.
Very good.
And prior to that, I was a public defender for 18 years.
Were you? So you were with the DA here in Dallas?
Public defender.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, public defender. Okay. And so you also received a grant for South Dallas to have a court here, correct?
Yes, I also have what's called the SCIP court, which stands for Second Chance Community Improvement Program, SCIP, SCCIP. It's a program where we take young, mostly young, offenders that have no criminal record, and we deliver services to them to try and give them the skills they need to stay out of the criminal justice system. It's a pretrial diversion program that results in dismissal and expunction of their arrests once they complete the program. One of the very unique things about that program in Dallas is that we actually preside here at the Martin Luther King Center at the City Community Court. So we come out to the community to preside, so the offenders are right here. They don't have to go to the big courthouse, park, and get into the courthouse, and we can bring other stakeholders into the community as well. They can easily access the court. And that court I'm handing off to Judge Stephanie Mitchell. I'm retiring at the end of this term, so I'm trying to get these
get them
courts
seasoned for you.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll be around to work with them as they take over.
That's great. So what made you decide to start the SCIP court here in South Dallas?
I was recruited to do that. I wasn't.
He's a troublemaker, really.
It wasn't my decision to start the court. It was I was really a driving force behind having the court preside here. The
Okay.
original intention was to preside at the Crowley Courthouse. But because I've been involved in so many other problem-solving courts earlier in my career, the city attorney and public defender and district attorney's office approached me and asked me to preside, and
Okay.
I agreed.
And how long has that court been established here?
We've been going for about 2 years now.
Okay, great. So it's relatively new.
It is.
That is awesome. That's really good. And I've always tried to stress with my viewers that our Dallas County judges really do a lot for the community. That it's not just me in this robe and I'm sitting up, behind the bench and just sitting there, looking over my glasses, being all intimidating and mean and not saying anything. Because you guys, as a lay person, it is nerve-wracking to,
Sure.
yes, come before you guys. And to see that you are really engaged in getting to a root cause and trying to help people get more skills to lead a more productive life. As I have learned with being with the family place and being in some of the BIP classes, for the females, the BIP class is really focused on how did you get into an abusive relationship. And so we were briefly speaking earlier and just kind of asking about some of the statistics between their two specialty courts. And Judge Magnis, your domestic violence court is strictly for males.
That's correct.
Okay. And you see both females and males,
Correct.
but it's still predominantly men that are coming before you.
Right, yeah, the statistics I see in my court mirror what you see nationally. It's 90% men, 10%
Okay.
women.
Okay, and so and I know that you work with the family place as well, because I was informed that they're working on changing the name of the BIP program for the females. So it's not, this batterers intervention program, but more encompassing of awareness of how you got here.
Right.
And so with that, just kind of understanding how abuse happens and choices that you made out of low self-esteem, low self-worth, feeling trapped. Unfortunately, I heard Darlene Ewan speak at a candidate forum back in March, and she talked about statistically females who are being abused take 7 attempts on average before they leave their abuser. And I know with the family place, a lot of times the women who end up there in the class there are because there was a tipping point.
Right. Right.
That we are having an argument, scuffle, whatever, and in my mind, I'm done.
Yes.
And I see you coming towards me, whatever, and I push you,
Yes.
I do something,
Yes.
and you decide, well, she scratched
Yes.
me. And I'm sorry, guys, but when y'all get a cold, it's like you have terminal cancer. Oh,
Yeah.
she did.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, the police get involved, and the female is getting put in handcuffs going over a scratch. Over me pushing you, and you bumped into something, and now you got cut, and now I have the assault charges.
Correct.
And I know I brought up with Judges Brown and Lopez that unfortunately, and no one would argue good fathers haven't been the primary custodian of their children, but there are groups that are promoting, trying to start an argument with your significant other, your spouse, to get a domestic violence or family violence charge, because if it's within 2 years, you're not supposed to be the custodial parent of children. And so I'm running across a lot of females that are losing custody of their children over those types of cases.
Right, because one of the consequences, at the end, if someone gets convicted in my court, or they get put on some type of probation, what I typically will do is make an affirmative finding of family violence, and that carries with it some consequences.
Sure.
One of those consequences is the one that you just mentioned, that it can affect your ability to become either the primary custodian or have some type of equal custody.
Yes.
And so that's one of the consequences. So that's what you're talking about there.
Yes. Unfortunately, I met a young lady. She decided to file for child support against her ex, and they had a scuffle. And I said, this could potentially impact you because of the charges that were brought against you, even if it's deferred and it's dropped after you completing all of your requirements. It's still going to come up, and if he decides that he wants a petition for custody.
Right, and so the DA's office for a long time, and what we've been doing in my court for a long time, is whenever there's a female who's being charged, there is some look into the history there to see who really was the predominant aggressor, because like you described, women who use violence in their relationships, they use it for different reasons, and one of those reasons is either I've reached my tipping point, or I know he's about to abuse me. But I want something to happen before the kids get home, so I'm going to start it so it happens now before the kids get home, so they don't see it. So there's a lot of that. It's pretty rare to see a female who's physically abusive over a long time over a male partner. You see that more in maybe a homosexual same-sex relationship. I'm not saying women can't be abusive, but they use more emotional or psychological
abuse.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Judge Magnis, I came across a case of yours that I really wanted to focus on with, crimes against children. My rule of thumb about life is, as long as it doesn't involve me, my property, my children, my animals, my money, I'm fine. As an adult, as long as you're consenting, you should be able to do almost everything that you want to do within reason.
Sure.
But the elderly and children, I want strict punishment because I feel like they're a protected class, and they don't necessarily always have the means to be able to stand up for themselves. So with molestation and sex crimes that involve children, tell me, how do those cases look when they come before you, as far as someone molesting a child? And let's say it's not the parent, I took my kid to this camp and been taking my kid to this camp every summer, and we know the staff, and then all of a sudden my kid comes home and tells me, well, the youth camp director so-and-so has been doing this to me, or has been making me do this. And now I'm going, well, wait a minute, we've been going here for the past 3 years, what happened here? And charges are brought up because it's been going on with other children. So what do those cases look like, as far as, I'm a parent and I didn't know what was going on?
Well, those are some of the most difficult cases that we get in the system, because usually there is an outcry that a child has been abused, and it's very infrequent that there's any physical evidence. So it's very hard for the state to try the case and prove up the allegations beyond a reasonable doubt when they're just based on the witnesses'
testimony.
So they're very difficult, very traumatic for the child to have to come back and relive the offenses. So they're really tough for everyone involved.
Okay, and I know I ran across an attorney that he does a lot with defending individuals that have been accused of molesting their children, especially if it's going to lead into a custody case. And unfortunately, part of that psychological abuse, that some females may make up charges to keep the father from being involved with their children. So have any of those cases come before you where you're dealing with somebody who they're screaming from the mountaintop that they didn't do it, but they're still coming before you and charges have been brought against them?
Sure, that's very common, and a defensive theory is often that the child's being manipulated by the parents or another parent and for some other reason, and real common is the custody issue, where there's an allegation, if it's the father or a stepfather, that the mother is coaching the child to make these allegations to try and get leverage in the civil courts. That's a defensive theory. I think it does happen sometimes. I think we
So
do.
how do, and just to interrupt you, and I don't mean to, I mean, because for me, if I was in your shoes, that's a lot of smoke and mirrors to put, someone through over, I just want to have control over this situation.
Well, the child, if a child makes an outcry, the child is forensically interviewed at the Children's Advocacy Center,
Okay.
Dallas Children's Advocacy Center, or Irving Children's Advocacy Center, if it's in Dallas County. There's a forensic interview that takes place in a room like this, with a video camera, with a trained forensic interviewer, and they do everything they can to try and ask non-leading questions. The defense attorney has an opportunity to look at that interview as part of his discovery and preparing for the trial. And then the child's got to come in and testify in the court. So oftentimes, I believe that if there is coaching, and there is some ulterior motive, that comes out in the forensic interview. Not every child that's interviewed ends up with cases being filed,
Okay.
or it ends up that the grand jury recognizes that's what's happening and chooses not to indict, or through preparing for the case, the state may dismiss the case if that becomes apparent. But ultimately, it's a decision for the finder of fact, and sometimes that case will come to trial, either before me or a jury.
Okay.
And either the jury or I will have to decide, was this child coached and lied, or did the state prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt?
Do you have the luxury to talk to the children before any proceedings happen, or it's just when?
The only time I can talk to the children is during a hearing.
Okay.
If I talk to a child without it being on the record with both lawyers present, then I would not be able to hear the case.
Okay.
Because I would be getting extrajudicial information.
Okay.
I'd have to recuse myself.
Okay, that's understandable. Very different world between the civil family court judges, because they do spend a lot of time. I know Judge Lopez and Judge Brown did state that they spend a lot of time talking to children to help make their decisions. So just trying to educate the public on, the differences between the two court systems and how they operate, and seeing that will be seen as you obtaining more information to sway your decision.
Correct.
So that would not be seen as something that you would want to happen in a criminal case. And unfortunately, some of these cases do make it, and the accused is found guilty because there was enough evidence against them. So I know sometimes in more socioeconomically challenged communities, there have been situations where the parent has used their child as a means of making income by prostituting them, which is deplorable. And I hope that anyone facing any kind of economic challenge would definitely seek out other resources, because there are other resources than having your child abused by other adults by servicing them before they go to school or after school. So if a parent is involved, how does that play out in the courts?
Well, that's promotion of prostitution. That's a criminal offense. So the parent would be charged.
Okay.
So,
And just no more contact with the child after that, or what?
well, if they're found guilty and sentenced to the penitentiary, then I have no control over it after that.
Sure.
If they're found not guilty, I have no control after that. If they're found guilty and placed on probation, you bet there's not going to be any contact with that child.
Or supervision.
Yeah,
At least.
if I put or supervised probate, exactly.
Supervised
Maybe
visitation.
supervised visitation, something of that nature. But there's usually when there's a case involving a parent-child relationship in the criminal court, There's also an accompanying case involving their parent-child relationship
In the civil courts. Okay.
And I always defer to the civil courts orders regarding that, because as you've just mentioned earlier, they gather a lot more information about the parent-child relationship.
Sure,
They spend
sure.
a lot of time. They have them looked at by experts, and so
Sure.
they usually have a more informed decision than I can make. So I often defer to them, not always, but often defer
Okay.
to the
Okay.
civil judge's orders.
Okay, great. So that is very good to know that, number one, those types of crimes are taken very seriously, and having the forensic interview. So I'm assuming that they're looking at their body language, how they're responding to the question, how long it takes for the child to respond, if they're feeling like they're having to think. I know some children, and this can be an impact of witnessing domestic violence and not wanting either parent to get in trouble, they can be shut down.
So there are some things that we look at,
Sure.
the forensic interviewers, the experts, the courts look at in an interview. You talk about body language, that's obviously very important. But there are things that if the child describes an event and uses very general language, that's maybe an indication that they've been coached, where if they use specific language and they discuss actually sensory things that actually, how it smelled, felt, tasted, or
Okay. Mm-hmm.
if they mention these sensory details, or if they mention details that are not like, when this was occurring, it was summertime, or the window was open or closed. So they mention unrelated details that show that they were actually in that situation, and just giving general language. So there are a lot of things, depending, of course, on the age of the child.
Sure.
That can be indicators either that they're not being truthful or they're being truthful. Or
Okay.
they've been coached.
Right. And I could see, with toddlers, that can be a very huge barrier because they're not able to articulate themselves very well. So it's very good to know. And unfortunately, we have some bad people in this world that do bad things. And, in my utopia, we don't have to do those things, and we don't have motivators in that case. But unfortunately, there are some mental disorders and personality disorders that drive people in different ways. And so, Judge, I wanted to ask you, with the Institute, kind of talk to us about, the training and the education that happens for other judges that are attending to get more information and more training.
Sure. Well, domestic violence is one of those types of crimes and one of those types of subjects that's very counterintuitive.
Okay.
So what you may, when you look at a situation, and if you try to just apply straight up, I don't want to call it just common sense because it's more than that, but
Right.
if you just look at it, try to
Your gut reaction.
Yeah, gut reaction, and try to make sense of it. You might come to the wrong conclusion. So like one question. Here's an example. So like one question we get asked by jurors a lot, or by people, and say, well, why didn't she just leave?
Yes.
And so while that seems very gut reaction, common sense, there are a lot
easy to do.
and easy to do. There's a lot of good reasons why a victim is not going to leave
Right.
an abusive relationship. Love being one. I mean,
Yes.
love's a very strong motivator,
Yes.
but there
Having
could be
children. Yes.
economic reasons.
Yes.
I mean, I get victims come into my courtroom a lot and
Mm-hmm.
asking me to remove a stay away order because and a lot of the reasons is for economic, or I need help with the kids, or things of that nature.
And that is stay away or no contact orders put in place to protect.
Exactly. And especially at the misdemeanor level, a lot of victims don't necessarily want a relationship to end. They just want the violence to stop.
Yes.
And so, and we at the court system do our best to respect that, and do our best to not break up the family. That's not the point of my court, but to get the violence out of the relationship. So because domestic violence has a lot of those types of counterintuitive things going on, an institute like the National Judicial Institute we try to train judges to recognize that, because judges don't necessarily get specific domestic violence training before we take on the role.
Yes.
You have to get it for yourself.
Yes.
You know, and so that's part of the goal of the Institute, is to give them that advanced,
Okay.
you know, look at that subject.
Okay. Now, one thing that I did read about you in an interview that you did not too long ago was, you know, with cases that come before you, you want to hear details about the relationship, not just the incident that brought them before you.
Right.
And so why do you take that approach?
Well, partly because you want to craft an order that is going to be workable for both sides.
Okay.
And you also want to be able to address as many of the factors that are going on as possible. So to have a comprehensive understanding of the history of whether there's been past violence or no violence, or,
Okay.
you know, other factors, then I can craft an order that will maximize safety for the victim
Mm-hmm.
and accountability for the offender,
Okay.
and still make it workable. Because the point about making it workable is, if I order a stay away order and the victim is like, that's not what I wanted, I want, you know, then does she have an investment in honoring that order? Or, and it's not her responsibility to do it, but is she
Right.
still going to try to reach out to the defendant and say, come back home, you know, and while it's still the defendant cannot violate my order, he's the one who's going to get in trouble
Slapped
with me,
for it.
right?
Yes.
But it's just a matter. It's more about respecting what the victim really wants out of
Sure.
the case,
Sure.
and keeping her safe at the same time.
Okay.
And so get more information is always better.
Yes, and I can definitely understand that. And
Yeah.
so, in this day and time where we have so much information, and there has been a lot more open discussions about domestic violence, because I was raised by my grandmother, and so I heard about their domestic violence issues growing up from my aunts and uncles and other elders of the family. So, you know, it was a different time period for couples back then. But still, are you seeing, you know, people who are being abused that still are not reaching out to the police? They're still not taking those necessary steps to be more engaged and active in their own safety?
Absolutely, absolutely. Domestic violence is still a very much behind closed doors type of crime. I mean, the statistics show that 1 in 4 women in some point in their lifetime are going to be abused.
Well, that's a huge statistic.
Yes, and if every one of those women came forward, instead of having 3,000 cases filed every year in my court, there would be 20,000.
Oh, wow.
You know, and
Yes.
and you can see, you know, when the mayor started to speak publicly
Yes.
about domestic violence,
Yes.
you saw 911 calls
Calls
go up, and people were like, "Oh my God!" And it's like, no, that's always been happening, but now victims are feeling a little more comfortable
Okay.
and that's a good thing. We
That
want
is.
that to happen.
Yes.
So we want the numbers to go up, but you're right. It's still very much behind closed doors.
And it's
Yes.
it's an interesting phenomenon because it's everywhere.
Yes.
Yes,
but
regardless of education,
Right,
background, income level,
But
yes.
if you're living in this neighborhood, we're in
215,
75215.
yes,
Your chances are you're living in a high density apartment complex,
yes,
and your neighbors are going to hear,
yes,
and they're going to call the police. If you live on a half acre in Preston Hollow or Highland Park,
less likely to have intervention from your loving neighbors.
Your neighbors aren't going to hear it.
Yes,
So it's
yes.
going on there, but
Yes.
we're just not seeing as many arrests.
And I would also say, probably, and you guys, please correct me if I misspeak on this, as more education, more income is involved, the game becomes more covert. That the abuse is not as open as she's trying to hide a black eye. I've learned that some abusers will take body shots because it takes longer for those bruises to surface. That then it becomes more of a game of, well, I'm going to financially abuse you, and I'm gonna give you an allowance, and if you don't spend your allowance the way that I feel like is beneficial, then there's a consequence to that. So it's interesting to see the difference between your courts, because I would think that there would be a slow change in, especially, and I'm gonna bring up a really old movie, and I'm dating myself here, with The Burning Bed with Farrah Fawcett.
I've seen that movie.
Yes, that there would be women coming to the felony court now because they've used a weapon of some type to defend themselves, and it's caused great bodily injury to their abuser.
I represented women that were accused of murdering their husbands, and one that was very high profile, where she was eventually pardoned. She was found guilty and placed on probation, found guilty of manslaughter, placed on probation, and then pardoned. So we see that in the felony courts that are not going to be as often in Judge Canas' court.
Right.
But the big difference between my court and Rob's court is that mine are all placed on, my supervision court, they're placed on probation for felonies. So they're either used a deadly weapon, cause serious bodily injury, or they're frequent flyers. They've tried to strangle the complainant. So most of them have prior domestic violence cases. Almost all of them that are in my program have prior domestic violence cases. So these are people that have demonstrated a pattern of abusive behavior over time, and the interventions that we've tried to deliver haven't been successful. So we're being much more heavy-handed up there and have much more leverage.
That's great. That's great.
Judge Canas has, just because they're on probation for a felony, so the consequences
This is
are
a greater,
much more serious.
Yes, that's amazing to know. Just because scratch, because I've pushed you, or I've shoved you, and you hit something else and suffered bodily injury, versus a bad baseball, bad anything. A gun, a knife, choking a victim.
And the reason why a lot of the people in my court are receiving probation is because of the whole dynamic you discussed earlier, where the complainant, the victim, is unwilling or unable to come to court to testify, so they compromise and ultimately take a probated sentence. A lot of these guys, offenses are such that I don't think the jury would give them probation if the complainant could come forward and actually testify. But they're for so many reasons, and one reason that we haven't discussed why we can't get their cooperation is the post-traumatic stress syndrome.
Yes.
Where they've been battered and abused for so long that kind of their executive functions break down, and they're not really able to make good decisions. They're really in protective mode.
Yes.
And they don't make good witnesses when they're in that condition as well. So it can be very complicated. And I know Judge Canas deals with victims suffering PTSD.
So do you offer services or make sure that the victims receive some type of treatment for those situations where they're anxiety driven, a lot of depression, there can be anger involved, and PTSD shows up differently for every person? It's not the standard checklist, like you say, if someone's depressed or schizophrenic, something of that nature, because PTSD for a veteran is going to be very different than me, who is a housewife, and I've been put into traumatic situations. So are there things that your court offers?
Yes. So for women who are listed as the defendant, like we were talking earlier, they definitely, we look at them, and if they're not the predominant aggressor in the relationship, which is mostly that's the case, they're not the predominant aggressor, then yes, they get those access to those services and so on and so on. what we're starting now, I'm hopeful beginning of the year, is that I got some grant money to actually have a victim advocate from the family place who will be working in the court. And this person won't work for the DA's office or the probation and won't be reporting to me, but will be there to talk to the victims who are listed as the victim in the case, to offer them those services. Because the courts are oftentimes the first point of contact that these victims have, and the first time that they might have an opportunity for someone to come up and say, you know, can we offer you some extra services? So that's what's going to be happening.
In my high-risk supervision program, now my volume is way different than Judge Canas. I only accept a total of 40 at a time in my program. So I have the luxury of being able to deliver more services. You have probably how many cases right now?
1,000. Yeah.
Thousands, 3,000?
Yeah, 3,000 every year.
And 40. So you can provide so much more hands-on with
So in my program, the family place provides the BIT services for the defendants, and Genesis Women's Shelter provides me with a victim advocate. And both these agencies are essentially doing it with no compensation. We've got some grant money, but we're not nearly paying the family place the value of the services they're delivering. And Genesis is actually able to provide this victim advocate. It's a part-time position at no cost. They're not asking for any money. So, she comes once a day, but if they seek services, she can deliver the services.
That's great. That's great to know.
Yeah, it's been really remarkable how much community cooperation both of us can receive. All we have to do is go out
just
and
ask. What I want everyone to know, and as a precinct chair, my job is to get the vote out, and the whole purpose with doing the show is getting the general public to understand, and primarily, the citizens of Dallas and the residents of Dallas County to understand what these positions are able to do for the community. And with Judge Magnis saying that, just ask, and we can offer more things to people that come before their bench. So with so much advocacy and sensitivity that you all are able to provide in these situations. So I have seen, police officers, treat victims, myself included. If you're having a panic attack in the moment and you've just been traumatized, or you're crying out for help and no one seems to be listening, I have seen police officers be kind of dismissive in those situations. So how do they fit into this? Because I will say, with narcissistic personality disorder, and that's come up with the family place and also with Genesis, they are fantastic liars and will convince anyone that the sky really is magenta, but there's just something about you that you're seeing it as blue, but it's really magenta, and you end up kind of questioning yourself in that moment. So knowing that that exists, some police officers may discount the real victim in the situation. And how do you guys manage that in the courtroom?
Yeah, it's especially I may see this a little bit more than in the sense that if it's just a push or something like that, there's not going to be any physical evidence. So it's one person's word versus another person's word. And especially if you lack experience, whether you're a judge or a police officer or a prosecutor, it may be easier to fall into that trap of, well, it's he said, she said, how am I going to make this decision, and so experience, training, understanding, the dynamics of trauma, and how that works, because, if a police officer rolls up on a scene and offender is all calm and cool and collected, and victim is all, just
they're
got hit,
shaking,
yeah.
they're
Yeah.
trembling, they're not be able to speak as fluently as you would like.
For an inexperienced police officer, that could be very, well, this person's got it all together. I mean, why would
They have to be
seem
telling
very
the
reliable,
truth,
right?
right?
So it's hard, and it's hard for judges too. And you can see this in court when during jury trials when you may get a victim who kind of breaks down on the stand because they're reliving the experience versus a guy who's going to take the stand, and they usually do in cases in my
And they're
court,
very cool
and they're
and
very
collected,
and,
yes.
and juries acquit them. And I'm not saying that's necessarily wrong. I mean, maybe that was the right thing to do, but I think part of that dynamic is that jurors don't have that experience or tools.
It's such a complicated area.
It is. It's very
understanding the trauma that Rob was talking about, as well as understanding how charming these guys can be.
Mm-hmm.
Many of them, especially the ones I see, are serial abusers, and they often have 2 or 3 relationships going at a given time with women because they're just incredibly charming.
Yes.
And the police officers that are responding to these calls are patrol officers.
Right.
They're not specifically trained in domestic violence. So you got what needs to happen, and I think we're moving in that direction, is all the patrol officers in the departments around the world have to be trained about these
Okay,
things.
okay, great.
And now, if you talk to one of the detectives at least in Dallas Police Department that works family violence cases, they get it.
Right, but they're not the front line
But-
who's
Yeah,
going
right, that's
to
true.
the situations
Right.
from the 911 call.
That's true.
And I will say that it was very interesting. Once again, I'm going back to some candidate forums just because of candidates speaking from experience. And Tracy Gully, there was a situation that happened where a mom's children were kidnapped. And she wasn't very coherent about being able to describe the car. She was just like, I need to get my children,
Exactly.
go.
Yeah.
Let's go. And I can see that definitely being challenged, and the candidate that was running against her was like, y'all could have done more. And I'm like, excuse me, okay, mom, here. Something happens to your kid. Mama Bear shows up, and she's just like, where are my kids? I'm gonna protect them. Get out the way. Right. So in those moments, it would be nice to see officers kind of do some small things to get someone to calm down.
Right, and I think it maybe as a system as a whole, and I know we're not going to talk too much about it today, but there's a lot of talk about how do we use eyewitness testimony going forward.
Yes.
And it's in reliability, and that's in all kinds of situations, and it's also part of that discussion. I hope will be recognizing that sometimes, asking people when they're in a traumatic state, what went on may not be the best technique
time
for justice. And fairness.
Yes.
But I will tell you that the Dallas Police Department was always willing to innovate and learn and change their behavior. I mean, we really do have in the city of Dallas a good police department.
Yeah.
Being
really
progressive, and that's very good to hear that officers want to understand, because they are our front line when things are feeling out of control for us. We feel like we need to have support, protection, someone to intervene in a situation. So it is good knowing that, one, and I always say this, that human beings were so beautiful, but we are equally ugly. Because of, and I say that because of how we can treat one another. And not necessarily always put our best foot forward with saying, I want to be treated so this particular way, so I will treat others in the same fashion.
And with people that we're supposed to love, right? We're talking about families, right? So.
Yes, true.
People we do love.
People we do love, right?
Absolutely. And I will say, with both of you guys' courts, on the flip side, with looking at an abuser, looking at the abusee, it is clear that, they have some damaged self-esteem and self-worth, and they're trying to compensate for those missing factors. in their relationships, but also the abuser is coming with self-esteem challenges, self-worth challenges, especially with personality disorders that, you know, they have a hole that they're trying to fill as well. And unfortunately, this is a reflection of just not having the best coping skills to deal with feeling out of control. And it's unfortunate that, you know, people will resort to violence.
Most of the offenders, though, we think, and the data suggests that they're not out of control when they're committing violent acts. That it's actually is control, the way in which they're controlling their environment.
Okay.
I don't know what's driving that, but they're not acting out in anger. They're usually pretty methodical about what they're doing. They know what they're doing.
They may be in control of when they're using the violence, but maybe out of control in other aspects
of their lives.
Yes,
Yes. Because I was going to bring up reading a book on narcissism and narcissistic abuse. They are very calculated. This isn't, I meet you and all of a sudden, you know, I start beating you. No, they actually spend time listening to you and what they call grooming their victim to pull them in. And as one therapist that I spoke to about it, it's like, you don't see it coming because you think you're like, they're your perfect match and, you know, you're their sun, moon, and stars. And then all of a sudden something happens and it's like, what just went on here? Like, you just called me out of my name and it was all over because I left, you know, the toothpaste open, you know, on the counter, or I was late picking up the kids, so I'm late getting home making dinner. Triggers on both sides, but definitely, and that was a great point that you brought up, Judge, about, you know, they are in control, and these are just things that they execute in order to maintain control. And it's, again, just very unfortunate that people feel that they have to resort to this instead of seeking help for themselves and learning to have better skill sets there. And to talk about the children witnessing this, that can play a huge factor in if they come before you guys bench later on in their lives, if you happen to still be on the bench, but coming back to the courts and continuing this cycle of abuse, because children are going to emulate what they see. So they'll learn to become an abuser because they see the effects of it and they don't want to be in that situation, or they learn to accept abuse.
Yeah, and I think teen dating violence is the awareness of it is on the rise, and neither of us see teenager defendants in our courts, but
that'll be a question for
juvenile,
Judge Martin next week.
Yeah, that's right. There you go, exactly.
Oh gosh, yeah. So it's, you know, with Judge Lopez and Judge Brown, you know, the big point that was made with adults is keeping adult business away from children. And as the point that you were bringing up earlier, you know, sometimes the abusee can start the fight before the kids come, to get it out of the way. Right. So then they can go back into their cycle. Because abusive couples do have a cycle where they're, you know, going through the honeymoon phase, then the verbal assaults start to happen, and then eventually it turns into a violent event, and then we're back at the honeymoon phase. Right. And, you know, children are witnessing this, and, you know, we have to do everything that we can to make sure that children are protected. And I know that Genesis does a great job with doing desensitization training with children that have witnessed, you know, domestic violence in the home and getting that education, which is why, you know, I'm doing this for people to understand what is going on and what we can do better as a society, and making sure that, you know, the most powerful place is in the ballot when it's time to vote, and making sure that you're voting for educated, aware people for judge positions, that you are, you know, when you're voting for head DA, that they have a lot of knowledge and experience to, drive the other DAs to do their due diligence and not just say, oh, well, this is just cut and dry. That, they understand all the dynamics that happen because, again, we're complex. We're not simple interactions with each other. So, and again, this is in a place where you're supposed to feel safe and loved. And you're seeing violent acts, even if it's something as simple as, well, I'm not going to let you have a debit card to go shopping. So any other points that you guys want to bring up for the criminal side that impacts families? And just understand that, we're trying to keep families together, but keep them safe.
Right, exactly. That would be a good point. I would believe that the court system is not there to break up families. It's there to get the violence out of the family.
Okay, and for you, the biggest one is making sure that the civil court, is involved if there's a custody case being involved, and you supporting the decisions that the civil court makes as far as interactions with the parent-child relationship.
In general, that's true, but in this high-risk domestic violence program that I set up, when I set it up, I called in all the stakeholders that were going to participate, and I asked them, what do they want me to focus on?
Okay.
And they said, no lethality, no murders. So
That's great.
That's,
yes. And so who
that's
were the stakeholders that you spoke to?
The Sheriff's Department, Dallas Police Department, Genesis Women's Shelter, Family Place,
Probation.
Adult Probation,
Okay.
District Attorney's Office, Public Defender's Office. I brought in just about Commissioner's Court.
Okay.
Just
Okay.
about everyone I could, and got them in a room and said, this is what I want to do. What do you want me to focus on? And the real consensus was, and it was during the time when had been a lot of shootings,
Okay.
that we don't want any more women being killed. So you can supervise these guys, focus on the guys that show the highest propensity towards lethality, and that's what I do.
Wow, that is great to know that, that number one, you pull so many people to be involved. And sometimes, again, this is a crime that is committed, that's very private. People are not coming out of the woodwork saying, hey, yeah, this is what's going on in my household, because it is very embarrassing, especially if you have a victim who is educated and feels like, well, people are going to think less of me because I should have known better. And still in this day and time, so we're coming into 2017, and I spoke about, my grandmother's time. And back then, spousal abuse was okay. I mean, it was sometimes encouraged for the husband to beat their wife into submission, which for me, being born in the 70s, I'm not able to understand that type of mentality. Yes, go ahead.
No.
I was born in the 70s. It's tough to
It's tough to grasp because,
Like youngsters, I was born in the 50s, and I still don't understand it.
I knew a physician, he was born in the 30s, and he's like, things were just so much better when we could just knock the mess out of you. And I was like,
nice.
I did not hear that. I'm like, you are a physician. I did not hear that. And he's like, well, sometimes y'all get out of hand. And I'm like, and y'all don't either. Like, we just wake up and say, how am I going to irritate my significant other, my spouse today? What can I do to drive them back crazy so they can hit me? Yeah, that's not something that we, typically thinking that women are waking up and doing. So I encourage anyone who is feeling that they are in an abusive relationship, and do understand that abuse is not just physical, that there is financial abuse. If someone is controlling your ability to spend money the way that you see fit, they're giving you an allowance. They're taking your money from you. You're the one who's earning all the money in the household, and they're managing, they're showing you that they're managing the resources.
And then, of course, there's they don't let you drive.
Yes.
They monitor your
Whereabouts,
phone,
your phone.
your
Yes.
computer. They put spyware on your phone so they can
I
tell
heard
where
about
you
that.
are.
Yes. You know, limiting your interactions with your friends, or if you find that you're not as social as you used to be, and you don't talk about your relationship that you're in for fear of ridicule, or you're at that 7th or 8th attempt of thinking about leaving, and it's starting to get to that place where you want to leave, and so you no longer talk to people because they don't understand domestic violence and how impactful it is and how hard it is to leave an abuser. If you feel, you know, you're being put down, someone is abusing you sexually, even if you're married to them, they're forcing you to have sex. I read, and this was very interesting, and this was kind of startling, that it is a form of rape where your partner wakes you up during the night to have sex. And I was totally blown away by that. It was someone in Sydney, Australia, that had written a paper about that. So withholding sex, forcing you to do acts that you don't want to do, that is a form of control and abuse. So I just want everyone to understand that it's not just someone hit me.
So I do have a couple of points to make
Yes,
for
sir.
the potential voters out there.
Yes.
One is all courts are public forums, so if you want to see how the judges behave, go watch them.
Very good point.
You can
Very
watch
good.
them and see how they treat people and see how people treat them. Both of those are going to tell you a lot. And the other is show up for jury duty.
Yes, Judge Mulberg,
Just
Judge
show
Hoffman, Judge
up.
Hurt, yes. Yes, there has been a lot of discussion on the show about coming and participating in civic duty, because that is your way of shaping society.
That's right.
So, and there's a great need, and I know that everyone dreads jury duty and getting the letter in the mail, but all of the great judges that I've had on the show have all stressed participating in jury duty. If you should happen to go before a judge and you want a jury trial, your pool of people to serve is getting smaller and smaller. And if this is supposed to be a jury of your peers, then we all have to do our part and participate. And great point again with bringing up that, you know, the courts are public. So come in and see the interactions and what goes on and how the judges conduct themselves, how the attorneys interact with the judge, and also, you know, both sides, the accused and the victim, how they're interacting and behaving in the court. So, you know, this is a great opportunity, I think, here in Dallas County, with such a change in the county going from red to blue, that we're seeing so much more in community engagement with our judges, with our police, with everyone, all the stakeholders that you brought to the table, that we understand that it's not just black and white, there is a lot of gray, and we have to kind of get to what is really going on and make the best decisions that we can for the public. So I want to thank you guys for coming on. I appreciate it. All right, so Coffee and Politics, a wonderful show. I hope you got a lot of good information about what happens with the criminal side and how that can bleed over into the family court system and the civil court system. So again, submit your questions and give me feedback so I can bring this up with the guests that come on the show, and that also helps to shape, you know, future topics and guests that come on the show. So again, thank you guys.
Thank you.